Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
Okay, this is going to be episode 5 of Watch the Overture. I'm here with Yiska again. And the topic we're going to discuss is basically the significance in Overwatch of things like the structure of the season, having stage playoffs, basically kind of the meaning of the Overwatch League. Because when you launch a league, so for example, if you think about LCS, as much as everyone in League of Legends might laugh at Western regions, so Europe and North America, because you know what, they've never won Worlds. They've never really challenged Koreans beyond like the odd match or a certain matchup that was like pretty cool to watch, Generally, they have been the inferior regions of the big regions in the world. So as a result, if you can say, like some people can, like Perks in Europe can say, I'm a 4-time LCS champion. Bjergsen can say, I'm a 5-time LCS champion. That's pretty sick. But the problem is, as much as people can hate on them and go, yeah, but you never won Worlds, so who cares about that? And, that's nowhere close to the Korean League. It still does mean something. It's still quite a cool marker. People definitely get hyped when it's the finals of the LCS or you make a deep run, It means something if you've been to even the finals. Like my favourite player, actually, Forgiven, has never been to an EU LCS final. These things all mean something. So you can see kind of what we're making the point about here is, does Overwatch League have that? I mean, that's where we've got to start, right? Because at the moment, we haven't finished the season yet. So we don't know how we'll feel once the playoffs is done and whether that'll be some amazing spectacle. Because obviously, I can tell you immediately that one of the flaws I see in the Overwatch League season is actually what people like Riot did in the early days of League, which is the reason why in the early days they only had the regions split up in the beginning of the LCS. So they had the European LCS and the North America, and then the only tournament you remember beyond LCS they had initially was World Championship. They didn't have what is now the mid-season invitational where the top team from each region plays. They didn't have Rift Rivals. They didn't have these other international tournaments. And the reason they explicitly said why, Yiska, is because they thought that, I can just tell you internally, a lot of them were fans of the NFL, and they thought, right, what it needs to be is like the NFL, where first of all, in the NFL, you're not getting much cross-conference play, people are divided up, and then the dream is you want the two best teams, hopefully, to meet in the Super Bowl, haven't met yet, and then it'll be the ultimate game, and they actually really believed that the fact that the teams hadn't played made it more exciting. Now, I have to say, from my own experience of esports, it tends to go the other way. Excitement actually builds from repeated meetings, and that's what makes the most epic match epic because of what happened in the past year. So where would you start with this topic? Like, what was concerning you when you came up with this one? Of why is there an atrophy of meaning in Overwatch League in that sense?
Okay, so basically the first thing where it really smacked me in the face is when the stage playoffs of Stage 4 happened, and Valiant was obviously excited about them winning, but NYXL was able to walk off that stage with a smile on their faces. And that's the last thing I want to see from a competitor in a match that supposedly is supposed to mean something, right?
Sure.
It's also, I asked myself, when was really a time when I had goosebumps in the Overwatch League? And is the frequency of that comparable to, for instance, to a tournament like Apex, right? Where I definitely had them in the run-up to the finals. Yes. Obviously, we were graced with great finals in Apex.
A lot of really good ones, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that definitely helped as well. But at the same time, I guess, yes, there's a problem with NYXL's dominance in that sense, but it never seemed to really impact me and grip me as much as Apex, for instance, did. I'm not kidding, right? I was at the Takeover offline event, right? For the second one, and seeing that match against Rogue, I forgot who else it was in the final, and seeing Uber Shouts cast that final gave me more intense goosebumps than any of the stage finals. And that's in a gaming bar, just witnessing people having what they at the time deem meaningful, right? So my question is, and I don't want to party poop on the whole thing, because obviously the tone of the league is more fun, I guess.
Sure.
It's also, I guess we're going to talk about it, but it's also from a production perspective. It's something needs to be said about authenticity, because you can't the entire time step on the pedal of epicness, right? Because at some point that is not warranted at all, right? So it's, I guess, what I'm saying is basically there are many obstacles to overcome. It's not just because of the overworld league, because I also think that it's an uphill battle in terms of the game itself. What Overwatch as an esports offers in terms of a meaningful experience, because you need to unriddle the language of the game, so the code it's written in order to make it meaningful, make it so that viewers as well as players can actually start caring about this. And I think in terms of the inherent value of the game, players are obviously much more in tune with that and have a thing there. So NYXL walking off that stage with a smile on their face can only, in my estimate, be explained with the structure that the Overwatch League currently has.
Yeah, I have to say, this is one of the things where when I found out the Overwatch League format, I was so disappointed, because actually I was one of the people. In fact, if you go back and watch the first ever episodes of Oversight where we discussed the Overwatch League and its starting, it's always me saying, I always treated each stage playoffs as though it was like the big LAN at the end of like the stage, and this means something, you know, and at the end we're going to count up who had the most stage playoffs. And then, you know what, yes, obviously the World Championship, the equivalent will be the playoffs of the season itself, but you know, these will mean something along the way. And so I actually thought, hey, this is cool. They've managed to, on the one hand, do a league format, which for some reason they always want in America. You know, you have stable playing times, each team gets a lot of games, you get exposure. I understand the business reasons why they want leagues. I don't like leagues myself, but okay, I can accept that, because I thought what they've done is say, here's the best of both worlds. We're going to give you a league, but at the same time, we're going to split it up in a way so that it's not like purely just beginning to end of a league. You know, there's a way that you can feel. So for example, a perfect example where they succeeded would be, there still was excitement around Dallas Fuel having a run in stage 4, because it was stage 4. It wasn't just, well, it's the end of the league, and you know, if they do really, really well, they can be the third worst team instead of the second worst. You know, that would have been a shit storyline. Instead, there was this thing of like, will they make the playoffs? Can they? Maybe they could even win a stage playoff despite the fact the league's done. I thought, right, cool. So we've got like 4 LANs and the league, and then a big LAN at the end. So you know what? If you love LANs and series like I do, that just think of that as the real Overwatch League, and then forget the league part. Okay, that's going to determine who's in the LANs, but just tune out of that. You don't have to worry if you're not that into it. What I've realized now is they sort of half-assed the part of the stage playoffs, though. Like, first of all, putting them on the same day as some of the last games was obviously very silly, because it didn't differentiate, you know? You should have come back. Like, I would have had it be something like, you know, you only play on the Sunday in the final or something. You make it Championship Sunday, and there's, you know, there's nothing else. It's just till Saturday like you see normally on the week. You know, do something special with it, and also make it so that you step between the two worlds. When you're in the league part, yes, it's all about, right, where are the overall standings? What does this mean? But then once you get to the stage playoffs, make it a big deal. Make it like, this is going to mean something in history, you know. Let's see who in history, like, for example, if you did it the right way, then in, say, 3 seasons of Overwatch League, it'd be pretty awesome if New York Excel has, like, 6 stage playoff wins, and then, you know, even if someone, like, say, 2 seasons from now, the best team, just for a joke, I'll say, is the Florida Mayhem. They turn everything around. Well, now, when they're starting their dominance, but they've only won 2 stage playoffs so far. Will they ever get to 6? Will they ever be like the number 1? Is it like Jordan versus LeBron? You know, there's all these extra elements that we all can understand intuitively and connect to that would be awesome. But sadly, what I've realized is these things were clearly an afterthought. What they really wanted was a league, and they think that's the best format, so they've made it about the league. I know this is where I'm going to go ahead and be suspicious and give you like a mini conspiracy theory. When someone like Monty himself, who I know loves LANs, is constantly stressing, as he did on those Oversight episodes, he always pushed back that, like, yeah, but who really cares about the stage playoffs? And, you know, it's all about the real playoffs. That's where I really got the sense that just means that that's like the internal culture in whoever's deciding things for Blizzard in the Overwatch League, is like, this is like a little spectacle for the fans, but you've got to always have your eye on the bigger picture, the bigger prize. And also, as you're saying here, you've got to make it so that each individual league game's super important and super hyped. And therefore, as the old saying goes, if everyone's good, if everything's good, then nothing is good.
Yes.
You know, it can only be good relative to something else. And so if you're going to make hype, as they did, for when Shanghai Dragons plays Dallas Fuel, then you have ruined the concept of hype, because that's the one game that you have to sort of Now, here's the thing. As an analyst, you earn your money there, believe it or not, because you have to go, right, here's the reasons why it could be an interesting game, or here's what would have to happen to make it. You can still do all that. But if you just sort of tell fans, this is another great game, it's going to be exciting, well, then there's no great games. There are no exciting games in the Overwatch League.
No, in a sense also, I think it got it backwards that the Shanghai game against Florida was a bigger deal, not just in the community, but also on the broadcast, I found, than who actually makes playoffs, right? There were a bunch of teams that could have gotten in, but everything seemed to be like this should really be an afterthought. Like I get that it's like that they have a big audience and that it's probably something we're unlikely to see once again, and that they're a fan favorite, but at the same time, I feel like it gets wrong what sports or esports should be about. So up is down suddenly. What you're saying, you can't have good without the bad. That is the thing that stretches through all these types of layers that I'm looking at. They're basically having yin without yang, right? That's basically what it comes down to. In a sense, when we're talking about the stage playoffs, it seems to be that there's also a mismeasurement of how excitement works. And that works on all levels as well. So there's peaks and lows, right? In Overwatch, there's way too little peaks, right? On a macro level, in the sense that we have stage playoffs, but we don't even care that much about them. We don't make him a week event, for instance, right? So Saturday is done, and then Sunday, I mean, we're usually not even watching on that day. We have no time to create interesting narratives about the matches we're about to see. One day, we don't really get to feel the importance of it, right? The teams don't get to craft specific strategies. They have to gamble on what their opponent will be, significantly lowering the...
Yeah, this is actually... I mean, let's go into this topic here then, because this is another piece of context that people won't understand. This is one of the reasons, by the way, actually, to remove the conspiracy part. This is another reason why I understand why Monty actually doesn't hype up the stage playoffs. Because actually, objectively, the stage playoffs should be worse games in terms of like preparation and how you're going to match up than even the regular season game. Because at least in the regular season game, you knew who you were going to play. And in an Apex final, you have a week or a week and a half to prep for that one guy. So instead, you might get a match. Like, let's be real. The most exciting game of the entire Overwatch season was probably the fucking Philadelphia Fusion almost doing it and beating the NYXL. And yet that only happened because NYXL could not know, just in terms of resource management, that they were going to play Philly, and therefore that's not the team they prepped for. They prepped for their real rivals, the London Spitfire, and then instead had to sort of, in rush, go like, oh, fuck, sort of do whatever works against them. This is a big deal, right? If you want it to be memorable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's basically also what happened in the Stage 4 finals. I think, didn't NYXL say that they didn't expect Valiant to get into the finals? I mean,
something like that, because obviously Gladiator was playing Valiant. A lot of people thought Gladiators were actually going to be the better team. Yeah,
better team. What most people actually don't remember, because the narrative was, oh, Valiant's blowing off or whatever. But Gladiators won that regular stage in terms of map advantage. They were 9-1 and actually finished first, right? They were first seed for that one. So it's a problematic situation, because meaning is something that is, I mean, we're talking about a game, really, right? It's not something that has any utilitarian value.
It's abstract, right? It's like it's like you can't. Here's the problem: the main issue here is, it's like the concept of having an exciting match. You can't really reverse engineer an exciting match. What you have to do is you have to put the right ingredients together and hope that if I've done it correctly, over time, some matches are going to be exciting and amazing. So that can be, as we're alluding to here, format. Like I can tell you from Counter-Strike, one of the reasons I've been loving this last year of Counter-Strike Global Offensive is because a lot of my criticisms got through to tournament organisers. And if you look at the current formats we have lots of formats that have best of threes throughout them. We have double elim aspects. We have Swiss system, but with best, we have all all these improvements to what I wanted. And it's no joke. We've gotten loads of banging series out of it that we didn't get when it was best of ones. And it was like, you know, very limited format where even the winner plays, you know, 10 maps and the whole thing. Instead, now you can play 20 maps. All these aspects don't guarantee great maps, but they make them, it's like the conditions are much more favorable to produce a great match.
Yeah. And while there's waiting between the different events week to week, it's still, I mean, you have several majors a year, not obviously to tune that down, but even something like that, what's going on right now, ISO 1 Cologne feels huge, right, in comparison. Yes. We don't have these monumental tournaments in at least, if you want to consider the World Cup, I actually don't think that's that exciting.
I think that's an exhibition tournament. That's like the All-Star game in basketball or something, you know. It's got its own charm, but it's never going to be a big thing, is it?
Yeah, and once again, like, if you talk to the players, there's no prize money involved, right? Everyone gets paid the same. They're playing for, I guess, pride for their country or whatever, and some of them really treated to, like, nice BlizzCon, free trip to BlizzCon, right? Well, the best example was that match last year, the one everyone remembers, USA versus Team Korea. Now, logically, since USA played a pretty good fucking game in that match, their response to losing, if that was a World Cup a la the football soccer World Cup, should have been heartbreak. Like, oh my God, we were so close. We could have actually won this thing. That was the Korea. If we'd have beaten them, who couldn't we beat? And we went out in the round of 8. This is so unfair. The tragedy. No, instead they were like, haha, we did a great game. This was awesome. Like, wow, we were so close to it. It's like they were actually happy. Yeah.
Not like fully as happy as they would have been winning, obviously, but like it wasn't that far off. That was the maddest part about it.
Yeah. I mean, and currently the greatest contrast to this is going on with the World Cup, right? Like, whatever team goes out, it could be some team that never imagined to even win a match that entire tournament. They will be heartbroken. They will be crying on the ground, right? Like, nobody's going to seriously be happy of their performance there.
Because the stakes are super high, right?
Yeah, but why are they? There's no real reasoning. There's no utilitarian purpose behind that, right? Like, the meaning we create ourselves, in a sense, right? So, I mean, yes, there are things surrounding that. For instance, like the prize pool, honestly, for a venture this big, is pretty much a joke, isn't it? Like, in comparison to other tournaments. So, for instance, I'm not sure what's the prize pool for ISO 1 Cologne? Is it comparable to the entire Overwatch League, for instance?
No. In fact, actually, that's one thing that would amaze you. Because ESL 1 Cologne has every other factor, it's not even like comparable to a CSGO major. Like, in a CSGO major, you get $500,000 for first place. At ESL 1 Cologne, I think you only get $125,000. It's just that they've got every other aspect that makes it cool, you know, big arena, sick format, all the best teams, you know. So actually, if anything, that actually goes to show one of the flaws with the stage playoffs, right? Because remember, stage playoffs, you get 100K. 100K for first place, yet it doesn't really have that much hype around it, yet there's lands where you get that in CS that people will remember, like some of the ESL 1 Cologne type events for years to come. You know, they'll be super memorable.
Yes. But then again, yes, it provides some meaning to it, right? We know that, for instance, someone who wins a TI, that's a life-changing event with the money you make, right? That's nowhere near close. Like, if you're not making more from winning the Overwatch League than you would from your yearly salary, I mean, yes, it's a nice boon, obviously, and you, as a pro player, I mean, they're not getting old. The oldest good player in Overwatch League is like, what, 25? It still doesn't feel that meaningful, even though, I mean, monetary incentives are a pretty whack way to create meaning, I guess. But it's one way to do it, and in that thing, like, again, for a venture the size of the Overwatch League, I don't think that's up to par, especially with the amount of money that we see flying around in terms of what teams need to buy into the league now, what, for instance, Twitch paid for the broadcasting rights, whatever. It's like, you can make that winning 2 good, not even like great CS tournaments, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one lever to pull. Not a great one. I'm not a huge fan of that. But, I mean, there are other reasons why we don't necessarily care. And so also it seems to also permeate past players, past the talent, but also into the wider audience. Because once again, we're a sort of separated community, right? So we have the main sub going on. And one thing that I always thought, even when I started like creating content, it must have been early 2016. I wasn't actually that mad that the main sub wasn't about esports, because I always thought, and that was a natural progression in all the communities I had been part of previously, was in the beginning, the entertainment factor is the most important part.
Sure.
But the more you play, the more important becomes satisfaction, right? That's also a great gift that games can give you. You play, like, no matter what level you are, you can always compare yourself to your former self and then derive meaning from that. And then you can watch the great players. Like, can I do that? Can I apply that? The problem is that the patch situation, as well as the tone of the community, so how the main casual brand is sort of approach with the Overwatch League, is not in tune with that. It's not getting anyone there, and it's also maybe a little bit problematic the way. I mean, if I know I'm building the Overwatch League, I'm not sure if I'm choosing that type of marketing that the Overwatch League has taken. So, for instance, things that have a very casual approach. Like, I think their idea was get as many players in as possible. Yeah. And then naturally people will convert. Well, Overwatch has one of the worst conversion rates in terms of player base to actual viewers, because where are we? Like at 40 million players now?
Something like that, yeah.
And there's only ever 100,000 to 200,000 watching now. I mean,
and remember, this is one league. You know, it's not like other games that have different leagues each week. It's the one league. So in theory, actually, that's one of the reasons why it's so disingenuous when people compare the Overwatch League broadcast to certain other esports. Because, like, what other alternative is there? That's all there is in Overwatch, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it should be even higher, hopefully.
Yeah, it definitely should be. But the thing is, there's no meaningful interaction. So, for instance, one thing that I would definitely change. It's funny that it's coming from him, but XQC actually had a pretty good tweet about one thing: is how you make people care about a thing is show you the people that care. So, one thing he would do would be to show the faces of the players. If you can get them to care, obviously, is the prerequisite. But if they do, why not show their faces, right? I can definitely tell you it's more than just players as well. I don't know if anyone has any footage of Uberschart's casting, but that's performance art. And there's nothing in his posture that would ever tell you that what he's commentating is not the most important thing that you've ever seen in your life. It's basically a guy looking at a battle to the death, trying to describe to someone what's going on, right? To an FBI agent or whatever. Sure. It's unreal what this guy can sort of drag out of you and how he moves or whatever. Put a camera on him. Why not? Other esports do it. I'm pretty sure, for instance, that one of the most iconic moments in CS were when the casters were completely shocked by a play, right? And like... Yes. Anders whipping his hat back.
I think I was actually a clone. I think it was the one like 2 years ago or something.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years ago. Maybe it was 2015. Yeah, but there's the one where they did a tri-cast and there's a famous photo where like all of them are just going off completely. It is an iconic photo, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just if you're not convinced that this is a problem yet, just ask yourself, why has someone with the technical ability as Uberschartz not have a billion clips like, for instance, Freiburg, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Right? Why is that not a thing? There's arguably more clips before the Overwatch League where Uberschartz pops up. For instance, put your damn headset back on, son. You got a game to play. Everyone knows that. Which quote do you know from the Overwatch League? Something is not
it's not many other. That's the nuts thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I wonder about as well, actually, is technically, by the way, it was Hiko, are you kidding me? But yeah, there was a Freiburg clip as well. You've just blended the two together there.
Oh, sorry.
But here's the question on this, though, is like one thing that we touched on very early on that I think we should bring back is like the player aspect, because how do you get the players to care about the stage playoffs? Because I can tell you one thing that a lot of people are mistaken about in the history of esports is that bringing more money has made it more and more exciting and more tense. Like, I will agree, if you're in the final of TI, because you do know, like, holy shit, whoever wins this game gets X million, that might add a little bit extra on top. But no joke, as someone who's seen in Counter-Strike us go from, like, you know, $10,000 first place to $500,000 first place. I'm not exaggerating. When you get to like what's considered a major and you're in the final, people are competing just as hard. It's just as life and death, and they are just as elated or broken when they win or lose. And that shows me that you made the people care. They did connect fully with the game and the experience, and then the money almost became an abstract concept. Like at that moment, they're not thinking about the money as much as what this moment means. It's like the pressure of, I was in a major final, I wanted to win. Now, the sad thing is, what you've said before about especially that it's NYXL, that's the most key one. Because first of all, they have their rep on the line every time. They can only win if they win. Like, if they lose, in theory, everyone should be talking shit. Oh, look, the gap's closed. You know, Valiant can beat them next time. That means they're not unbeatable. And I know Koreans over history. I've seen Koreans at like small StarCraft tournaments be wrecked when they lost in the final when they thought they should have won, because they build in that whole element of like, oh, I've lost to a foreigner, and like I'm supposed to protect Korea's pride. They can sometimes go way too far with it, dude. Like the other way, where you'd be like, whoa, dude, calm down. This is just a small tournament, mate. Like, you used to be the best if you go to the GSL in StarCraft. But they care. So that's kind of worrying to me if people like NYXL are just brushing it off, or they're like, hey, it's just the stage playoff, you know, who cares about that? We'll get them in the main play. That's a bit of a warning sign. It's ominous, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the theme of the last two stages, and I guess you can start somewhere in the middle of stage 3, is that they were sandbagging, right? How is that an appealing thing if your best team's objective is to cruise so that it can maintain their sanity basically on that schedule? And like, you have the amount of dead games the Overwatch League produces, not just because the discrepancy between great teams and bad teams is so big, but also simply because of the format, because there's no recency bias whatsoever in it, makes it so that a team as great as NYXL can just stop caring at some point, right? Like, even, for instance, London got by on a 9-11 score in the last half of the Overwatch League, right?
Yes.
How are you then trying to make
Which
believe?
Obviously, by the way, the corollary point that you're alluding to when you say that is, in a world where it's not a continuous league and they don't already know we're probably going to be in the playoffs in a really good spot anyway, Surely they do play with a different urgency in that last couple of stages. Surely, like, if there was like a recency component where like stage 4 was the most important and that really decided your season, surely they would be life or death, and they would literally be like, first of all, destroyed if they lost that stage, because they wouldn't be even in the playoffs. And surely they would potentially play better. Like, I don't know how it would happen. I can't say I could figure out what they would do differently, but I at least feel like the sense around, even if the matches weren't the same, would be different.
Yeah. And it's not even a smart way to build momentum for the league, right? Because as the league starts up every year, and especially for the first one, obviously there's instantly excitement. We've waited for the league to start for like 5 months or something, right? We've heard all the new roster changes and everything. There's inherent value already created. So nobody has to tell me that it's a problem to make people care about stage 1 if the stage 1 means less than stage 4, for instance, for a playoff qualification. That's not going to happen, right? People want to see. I mean, it's no mistake that the highest viewership numbers were the first stage, because it's fresh in that sense, right? So I would then go ramp it up in terms of the later stages, because naturally, as so many games happen, and we can talk about if it's too many games, but as so many games happen, there's a lack of interest. There is a component of burnout, not just in players, but also in the audience, right? So what I would make it so is that the weight of the games have to be counter to the movement of just build up apathy towards what is happening in the game because of fatigue, right? So it's completely the other way around in the way it's created, and they artificially, in that sense, because of that system, make their numbers look worse than they could have been.
I actually think there's even an obvious solution here, which is basically the only way you could make these things matter is literally they had to matter more. So what I would have personally done is I'll even meet Blizzard halfway. I'll give them a compromise. They can have the current format of the Overwatch League, but we will just decouple it from the elements that drag it down, like the wagons at the back of the train that by the end, adding more and more wagons as the stage go on, make this train go slower, which is, I would make it so that, for example, the stage playoffs can auto-qualify you to the playoffs of the overall league. And therefore, as a result, if you're like NYXL, okay, you know one of the reasons why you should be trying to win? To stop someone else getting that spot. Because then maybe it goes on like a circuit point or something. So, first of all, if you win all the stages, maybe you're the only auto-qualified team and the rest of them have to go on their record. But you know what? If you're Dallas Fuel, you're going to go fucking ham on stage 4 because that's your only chance to make it to the playoffs. Because you can't make it on overall. You know, I'd have done something like that. So, in the sense, it would have been separate because these would have each been punctuating moments, you know. And by the way, then, if Philly had won that match or if Valiant wins the stage, now it's a fucking big deal. They just did something big time for themselves. Then I'd make it outside of that. Yes, the overall matches maybe qualify the other teams or decide the seeding for a qualifier to make it there at the end or so, whatever it might be, you know, add this element in. Because if you notice, as much as people want to talk about like competitive integrity and all these aspects, well, here's what's funny is that actually every American sport hasn't gone with what the Overwatch League's done, basically. Because the worst part about the Overwatch League is that because the league isn't very big in terms of number of teams, not that many teams do make the playoffs overall. It's only like 6 at the end. Well, the downside to that is, in the NBA, half the league makes it in the fucking playoffs because what they actually actively want is it doesn't matter that it invalidates the season. It does, by the way. I remember in 2007, the Dallas Mavericks won 69 out of 82 games and they got beaten in the first round by the Golden State Warriors, who was a very different team back then, in a massive upset. Now, you can't argue that that doesn't invalidate the performance in the split in the stage because it does. They won 69 games. In a world that Blizzard wants, they should have like skipped to the semi-finals and, you know, like the eighth seed in this scenario wouldn't even have made the play. You know, that match would never be able to happen. But the reason why they always build that in American sports, so in the NFL, for example, you know, you can have touch and go teams who make the wild card game, and if it's miraculous, they might win the Super Bowl. Most times they're not going to, but they want it to be like, on the one hand, we're going to give you all the upside of a regular season in a league, but at the end, well, we're not idiots. We know we've got to have a show. We've got to have David and Goliath, and we've got to have these mad, exciting moments, and we've got to have the possibility that something could go crazy and go totally different. So we'll build that in as well. And I agree, if it's actually a compromise, it's not one or the other. It's not the tournament that Thorin likes or the league that the English Premier League is, which, by the way, the English Premier League, also absolute fucking garbage. What it is every single season, everyone starts off hyped at the beginning, then they immediately stratify into 3 groups by the middle of the season. These 4 teams could win. These 4 teams are in big trouble of getting relegated. These teams in the middle have fuck all to play for, except maybe a miracle run one way or the other, by the way, to a European spot or potential relegation. And really, it immediately becomes like the Overwatch League is now, except at the end, at least the Overwatch League has a playoffs. English Premier League, massively popular league, doesn't have any playoffs.
Yeah.
Which is why, by the way, I don't think it's a coincidence that even though the league is still considered in every single football region that I'm aware of, the main thing you have to win. Like if you win the Champions League, like Liverpool did this in 2006 or whatever it was. They won the Champions League, but they didn't win the Premier League. Now, if you know anything about English football, everyone will still say about every one of those Liverpool players till their dying day, you never won the Premier League though. Like, you know, you're not the Manchester Uniteds or the Chelsea. So what's clever is, on the one hand, the league is important. It is what people have been born and bred on. But it's not a coincidence that the Champions League is massively popular. It's just basically a fucking massive land tournament.
Yeah. And then again, if we think about it, the way the league is actually working out in England, I would argue that's most of the time, and it might be luck, but most of the time you actually have more interesting content in the sense that you have relegation games. Well,
that Shanghai also matters, yeah.
Yeah, Shanghai didn't have to fear that whatsoever, right? All of those players aren't really in a situation where we can expect them to. I mean, maybe the worst Chinese players on the team, but everyone else, because of the extension and whatever, and also the problems of developing talent from contenders, and I guess that's ramping up. But still, there's enough slots for people of that caliber to still get a slot, and that's unbelievable, right? That's a team that went 0-40. How is anyone employable on that team, right? Yeah, I mean, if that happened in a regular sport, you'd have a pretty hard time trying to, I mean, maybe not if you're one of the better players, but most of you, you're going down to the second league. Now your owner probably or even considers if you're good enough for the second league, if you're getting blown out like that, right? All of that is completely not part of the Overwatch League. So the interest, and that's the problem, right? We had an interesting story, which was basically, for instance, is Houston Outlaws making it in, right? For my taste, this was not at all a topic or a big enough topic. I guess that's more fair to say, a big enough topic on the actual broadcast itself. I think that should have been the absolute story of that entire broadcast. Completely push Shanghai stuff aside. Yes, again, but why are we not constantly being updated what's going to happen? It felt like it only ever happened towards the last couple of games, but there's obviously much more excitement to drag out of that already starting from week 3 or something, right? Where it already was pretty close. And I think the most excitement that was built was actually by Twitter users who were like doing the math. Okay, what's happening with Seoul or whatever, right? Are they still? Is it still possible for them to get in? I'm not sure if the broadcast itself did enough to get the high points correctly.
Well, especially because in that example you gave there, because the Seoul one's the best one, because obviously they didn't in the end make it, and it was outrageous. The problem is, and again, I'm going to have to like invoke a conspiracy element here because I haven't spoken to someone, so I don't exactly know this myself, but it did feel very much like I can't put a lot of the decisions behind how the desk and the broadcast talent framed the league just on them. Like, even though some of them are new to esports and doing broadcast, so some of them might be making rookie mistakes, but there were enough veterans in there and from other esports games that I don't think it could be a coincidence that everything was about spinning up the positive. Like, for example, the real storyline, and this is a fucking amazing storyline, is Seoul Dynasty are the backbone of the greatest team to ever play competitive Overwatch. And they've brought in this superstar young player who was in a scenario where he wasn't in a position to be very good. And generally, their team is, they're built to win. If not be the best, they should definitely be elite. So the actual story, which should have built and been focused on and scrutinized, and in some ways would have seemed negative, would have been the super compelling story of, wow, look at the tragedy of this failed potential contender. Instead, it was always like, how are they going to turn it around? Oh, are things going on here? The closest they come were like vague things. Oh, maybe they're just not being coached well. If you were in a big traditional sport, I've seen this happen before, and you had what's perceived to be a super team, or you've made a huge signing, if you then don't deliver on that, now, it'll be negative for you personally because you'll get torn apart. Like, the scrutiny will be intense. People will constantly be obsessed over every little detail. They'll even be overreacting to minor things that might not be that big. But what's good about that is they care. That means everyone fucking cares about this story, and they're super engaged. And even the failure of it in the end becomes compelling. Like, it's actually one of the things, to give you a quick tangent, that I actually thought was genius in League of Legends was when the guys from Team Liquid had that split where what happened was, in League of Legends, Team Liquid was a team that used to just sign the best players that they could get. And they tried to put as much talent as they could, and they never managed to qualify for Worlds or win LCS. So what they did was, they had this one split where, because the team, like, they were transitioning from an old core of a bunch of good players, and they were trying to figure out what the new direction was. And it turned out in their academy team, where they had all these rookies that had never played an LCS, that they were all like popping off. They were all having like really good games that were like much better than the level you'd expect for beginner players. And so as a result, result, they said, fuck it, you know what, the main team's kind of a bust, like, it's not working, so just bring up the rookies. So they brought up the rookie players, and they had a miraculous run. They were one game from making the final. They were playing against the team who eventually won CLG, and they had this great run, so everyone was hyped for the next split, which is going to be the summer split, and that's the one that determines if you go to Worlds. So this team's in with a shout to do a lot of big things. So what happened was, because they were already an organization that had invested in infrastructure in terms of content creation, they wanted to continue their trend of doing a weekly reality TV series. And so what they did was they filmed it, but very early on, a lot of the footage was like never going to be able to be used. It was going to have to hit the cutting room floor. It was all arguments and the boot camp going to shit, and then people just arguing with the coach, and then people doing like really outrageous things that again would just look so bad that in a reality show would cause too much drama in a negative sense that you wouldn't bother. Because the season was going so badly in terms of results, then they realized like, well, we're not going to win. Instead, they canned the reality show and they just made a documentary about their failures and about how bad it got and about how where everything went to shit. And basically it could have been titled, it was actually called Breaking Point, but it could have been titled Everything Falls Apart or something, you know. But as a result, it was like a clever way to still bring something interesting, something entertaining, something that meant something out of what otherwise was a colossal failure, something that seemed to lack meaning. So that's what should have been done for sure with the Seoul Dynasty, because remember, the key thing about them was, unlike London Spitfire, they never even had their moment where they were really good.
Yes. Yep. The thing is that I think there's a fundamental, almost philosophical misunderstanding what calling someone bad actually means. So, in a sense, if as soon as you call someone bad, that doesn't mean you have disappreciation or whatever of this person. It actually allows you to free up, to provide the contrast, or the resources to say now someone is good, right? Unless
it's like this, okay, let me give you a really good example, because I've brought it up many times on Oversight, but no one ever bites on this, mainly because a lot of them are casters, so they're either oblivious to it or they don't want to talk about this. I always bring this up. I am so sick and tired of hearing about every single Widowmaker player being one of the best Widowmaker players in the Overwatch League. You know why that's so dumb? Because if I'm doing CSGO analysis, I'll give you the best analog for this, which is obviously the AWPer. Now, again, that is a role which doesn't have to go 1v1. You can obviously have fabulous AWPers and Widowmakers who just tear up the other team, and they both take to. But when you get the best Widowmaker or the best AWPer, oftentimes they even actively try to neutralize the other guy because he can do so much damage to your team. So what they do is they are like, right, I'm gonna take care of him, so you guys are all safe, and I'm gonna take over the game. And that's why it's such a baller role in the Overwatch League when you see a great sniper. Well, likewise in Counter-Strike, what we will often do is, even though again the AWPer can be shooting everyone else, we'll focus in on the AWP versus AWP battle. And as a result, to do so, I have to explain to you that because Kenny S is, let's say, my favourite AWPer, he's the best AWPer, I would say. Meanwhile, someone like, in the past, it would have been someone like Chris J, who used to be like, you know, an up and down, but generally wouldn't be on the level of Kenny S. I'm going to expressly explain to you that Kenny S is going to push his shit in. He is going to dominate him, and that is because they are not the same. Chris J is not one of the best, and you know, oh, seventh, first, who cares? They're all good. It's all top 10. No, I'm going to make it clear to you that anyone who isn't top 3 can't fuck with Kenny S. That means Chris J isn't top 3. He's not going to fuck with Kenny S. So, you know what? Watch this game right now, because when he dominates him, that's an important detail.
Yes.
And actually, even though if Chris J plays against, you know, the 7th best, the 8th best AWPer, the 9th best, it's going to be a good game for that. It's going to be a different matchup. You need to know that in the context of Kenny S, he is bad. He is, and he's going to underperform. And in fact, he's probably going to cost his team the game right now, because he's not going to be able to make up for or neutralize their biggest threat. And so the fact that they couldn't often do that, I don't know how much of it was coming from them, but I as someone who sort of could see what was missing, it was a bit alarming to me, especially because what it ties into for me is I also feel like the Overwatch League has flunked in terms of knowing its demographic. So, first of all, aside from what people probably think I'm going to do, which is go on the tangent about they courted all the SJWs, which, by the way, if you've noticed in all mass media at the moment, is death for your product. Because to do so, you always have to alienate the hardcore fans of your product, who are the people who spend the most money. And if anyone is not aware yet, SJW type people don't go in tens of millions because there aren't tens of millions. I mean, they don't go and watch all the Star Wars movies and buy all the toys. So it doesn't work anyway. But actually, that's a side topic. What I was going to get into is this, is Overwatch has done such a bad job of courting the casual fan, but it's also not given the hardcore fan what we're basically describing here, what he needs, because it's too focused on the casual fan. If you wanted to use a meme, that fucking stock photo where the guy's walking with his girlfriend and he's looking back at the hot bitch who's going behind him and his girlfriend's going like, what the fuck? Like, that's like the Overwatch League is the fucking, the guy walking up there, the girl going, what the fuck? That's actually like hardcore competitive Overwatch fans. And then the girl walking behind who's not even looking and is not going to be with this guy is like casual Overwatch fans who don't give a fuck about Overwatch League, because this is the dumbest thing. They've courted the casual fan who clearly doesn't care, and yet they haven't set up this epic confrontation that you want if you want it to be the hardcore fan, because the hardcore fan wants epic and the casual fan wants fun, lighthearted Disney entertainment. And at the moment, they don't cater to either, or at least they don't capture the one they're catering to, and they don't cater to the one they have, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, if you want an experience that can globally catch people and do something that sort of resembles what we currently see with the World Cup, I guess the heuristic for me would be that you should not try to be the good thing that people consume to counteract the bad shit that's happening in their lives. It should be a closed off system where there's a zero sum of this needs to be called good, this needs to be called bad. Otherwise, what actually happens, and that's the worst part about it, is I think actually for the most part, analysis has gotten really good on the Overwatch League broadcast. The one thing that's really a pet peeve of mine is that it's sort of like a throwaway comment to say, oh, this guy is very good. What you're doing actually is, for instance, if you're calling someone like Hydration a great player, is everyone that has not been mentioned at this very point in time now gets a little bit of credit taken away from him, and it moves up to Hydration. Why?
Yes.
Because value judgments are connected to all the other players in the pool. There's nothing great about a person that, for let's say, a thing in space where you have no reference point, you don't know where it's moving, right? So the point is you have to be very careful. There's two things that can happen with the type you're doing. Either you're calling everyone great and nobody is because of that, or you're now in a language arms race where you have to continuously invent new adjectives to sort of like one-up them, and then it gets silly at the same time. I get that, for instance, someone like Sideshow.
Well, it was like the joke we made about, remember when we had the episode with Cookie, and obviously he would always say everyone was good. So we made that ridiculous scale where, like, you know, good was like trash and like, you know, very good was like average. Like, we basically translated this so that a normal person could understand what you're saying here, where he was trying to be overly polite.
Yeah. And I actually don't believe that the casters themselves believe that as much. For instance, if I talk to Sideshow and if people actually watch or refute this series, he's very frank in who he thinks is bad, right?
I think that they actually just have, this is also where I wish I could in some ways get through to them on this matter. I feel like they themselves think, they're constantly in their mind, like filtering themselves through what they perceive as the audience's demands. Like if they think that the audience will go nuts if they say that fuel's done and it's all over, then even though they might think that, it'll somehow filter through in a different way. And they might occasionally come close to it. Sometimes they'll just stay far away. And so again, I actually don't think it's purely cynical. Like I don't think they're calculating it, but I think it's just they're constantly, it's like they have they're aware that this exists in the back of their mind as they're saying something.
Yeah. Yep. It's also, maybe to get a little bit away from this, I think it's also, something needs to be said about the way matches are introduced, in a sense. So we all know of these walkout things, right? And they're all fun in games and whatever. You know what the actual best walkout was this season in terms of making people care and providing meaning was Effect against Shanghai Dragons, where this guy came out and you could see it on his face. He was fuming and he was like, I'm not going to lose to these guys today. That was the best walkout we've had. The others are using it for jokey things, sort of. And if you know anything about like priming thoughts, so in terms of basically quickly explain, it's basically like if I tell you that I'm going to a toy store or whatever, and give you a selection of words you can pick, you're very likely to pick, for instance, the puppet or whatever is in the toy store. That sets the tone for the entire series, right? If there's only jokey things, how is there meaning? It's jokey. It's entertainment then, right? So I think the walkout in general was a pretty neat idea because it gave it flavor. I wish that teams would use it more to create meaning in a sense. And I'm not sure how you would do that, but I mean...
Well, I mean, one of the ways I can tell you, like a reference you'll understand immediately, is if you actually look in general at how they did all the Korean esports, they were actually, at times to a cliched level, obsessed with this epic nature, which quite frankly doesn't even translate to sports. Like actually a lot of even like massive sports in the West aren't built to the same degree they were doing it. Theirs almost went into like that anime level of like, you know, ridiculousness of like, this is the protagonist and the hero and this is the villain and oh my God, look at this. But in doing so, all those like hype intros for the finals where it would always revolve around things of like, you know, I must slay you now, brother, because I am the champion. That is all straight fire though when you watch it. It's amazing when you see it and it gets you in the right mood for it. Whereas, yes, this is the problem. When teams come out for the Overwatch League, because they're playing up to like the fun crowd and they're almost trying to make it like, hey, come out on a Saturday night with your family and watch a great game. It's like, that's the worst epic attitude I think you could ever set in terms of an ambience. Like, it's not going to be like that. If you leave, I have to say this, right? If you watch the Florida Mayhem play the LA Valiant in the Overwatch League studios and you leave after the Florida Mayhem gets soundly beaten and go, gosh, golly, what a swell game that was. You are not, unfortunately, the sort of fan we're talking about. Yeah. And in some senses, unfortunately, if you leave happy like that, I feel like the Overwatch League failed.
Yeah, in a sense.
It sounds harsh, but I just do feel like that.
Yeah, I mean, because keep in mind, there are enough entertainment ways in our society where you could just go, I want to have a happy time, right? So I'll just watch a movie of that sort, watch a comedy or whatever. That's accessible. Sports is not like that. Sports, in a sense, is sort of like a simulation on an abstract level how life should be, is at least how I perceive it. It's basically how I...
In a brutal sense, right? I mean, that's actually one of the things people often have implied, which clearly has something to it. That one of the good things about competition is it's like feeding the instinct in men for murder, basically. Hunting, killing each other. It is a way to... like rearrange status hierarchies and to be able to beat someone, but the difference is now I'm not literally running a sword through the guy's fucking throat and he's dead. He actually gets to go home to his family and I've just beat him in video games. But you know what? It actually feels the same to us. I get to talk shit to that guy forever. Oh, remember I beat you in that moment. You know, it actually, what's mad is it hits that. Yeah, the problem is if you sell it that we're just here to be a big hug fest and we're including everyone. And you know what? Even the last place guys are cool. That's actually, you're actively not feeding that inside. By the way, I already know there's some people who are like, oh, the toxic masculinity got in towards the end.
I don't think it's gender specific. What I do think, though, is that the content is too much about personality of the player than the aspect, for instance, of the warrior within him. That is the appealing part. And that's where, you know, the meaning comes from. It's basically, if I think about the Overwatch scene, there's like maybe 2 sources I can count on that they will deliver something like that, which is basically Volamel. And then I think Players Lobby is also doing a pretty good job because they allow players to tell their story, why they care. And then I think that's an element that's mostly missing from the Overwatch League, because we see like fun content, we see like, I mean, how often can you ask people if pineapple goes on pizza? Like, it's fucking whack in that sense, right? I get that people want to know more, and it's sort of also like the sector that we are in because of streams and whatever. People want to find out, but that should not be the focal point of a sports broadcast, in my estimation. At least not as much. I'm fine with being in at all, but I mean the weighting of it all is a little bit. Why is Malik not during these Toyota events asking players why it is worth doing what they are, right? Why are they not trying to sort of eke out what's that special sauce that makes someone leave their family behind, go across the world, possibly for pretty bad play, jeopardizing their future, possibly in terms of if it goes bad, delaying their education, right? That like, I get that it's in a grand scheme of life, it doesn't seem meaningful, but you can provide scenarios, and it's all attachment in general. It's if you can tell a compelling story, and if you can sort of tell the story of the people that do care, it's very hard to remain emotionally cold towards other people's emotions of caring.
The best story in the entire Overwatch League Season 1, and I think actually no matter who wins the season playoffs, this will be the best story, is clearly Fisher being removed from Spitfire, sold to Gladiators, turning Gladiators around, and then crucially beating the fuck out of Spitfire again and again and again, and now who knows what will happen. It doesn't even matter if he wins or loses, if he's already, basically the revenge arc has already played out. And what's great about that arc is it actually doesn't connect directly to what a great player and the things that Fisher does inside the game. It does, because some of the story elements wouldn't be possible if he hadn't been such an instrumental figure in the game. But actually, a lot of what makes you care about that story is the story, is the actual story. It's the circumstance of it. It's human elements of, well, of course you'd resent people who didn't give you a shot when you still felt like you were really good. And of course you'd have a validation where you'd want to prove to those people that you are better. And you'd even want to prove to someone like Gesture who, you know what, if you sit down, I'm sure even Fisher probably knows is better, but you still want to be like, you might be better, but you know what, I beat you this time, so doesn't that at least make you think maybe you took the wrong, you know, all this aspect has fuck all to do with knowing how main tanks play and how you zone people off your carries. Like, no idiot listening to this video has to know that. You can already get into that story and it'll be really fucking sick. You'll be like, well, what happens then? Does he beat him in the end? You know?
Yeah. That's the great part about sports in general, is that they're so abstract in the goals that they pursue, that they still, as a metaphor, fit everywhere in life. It's much easier to relate what it is, that drive is, whatever, than, for instance, if I watch someone in his office cubicle giving his best, right? It's very hard to tell that story. But for sports, like getting the goal in or whatever is directly relatable metaphorically to the viewers that are watching, and they get to take home that emotion or that maybe that idea behind why people are pursuing that, right? Like, the sports is at its best when it's actually doing something else within the viewer that is watching, not just for the players that are pursuing these goals, but saying like, yeah, that's actually, I mean, look at the most idolized people in the world. They aren't, for instance, the top CEOs. Like, nobody's kid wakes up in the morning and goes like, fucking hell, I wish to be Jeff Bezos, right? Like, I want to be Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi or whatever, right? That's why they have mad amounts of Twitter followers. So there is something magical, so to speak, about this experience of sport that captivates, despite being completely unimportant towards our own survival.
It's because what happens is, this is one area that actually I would say I have a decent grounding in, because basically it's always been the theme of my content. And in fact, one of the things for people who aren't in CS again, who won't know this, is in CS, it's become quite famous that some of the big events I work with, such as the one I'm at right now, ESL1 Cologne, actually draft me in and hire me to write the scripts that they use for hype trailers, teaser trailers for the teams. And what happens is, they tell me like a rough length, like it'll either be like 60 seconds or say like 5 sentences. And what I do is I write a script, and then they hire literally the movie trailer guy, one of those real guys in Hollywood who work by the hour, and you know, they're not always just doing movie trailers, they do other things. And so they hire one of those guys at great cost, but you know, they want to have everything ready in beforehand, so he's just taking the minimum amount of time. He reads them all off with the usual like gravitas, like, Team Liquid must come to, you know, he makes it sound way better. And the point is, because I'm always trying to make it epic like that, these things don't just become like, hey, are you a fan of Cloud9? They're playing next week, and if they do well, they can win. No, instead it's like, they failed before, and everything was looking towards what they could do next until their star player left them. You know, like, it's like I'm connecting the game aspect to what's epic about the game, and then the personality part can be a component in that, but it never supersedes it. It is never the most important. It never distracts or draws away. Yes. And one of the key things that I'm doing there that I think a lot of people are missing is that I'm not hyping. Like, I'm not giving you fake reasons why. Like, for example, there's some teams at this event that are garbage. And so instead, I make it more like, you know, if they want to become relevant in the game, they must prove that their region has what, you know. I'm setting up the story where if they did do it, it's amazing.
Yes.
If they don't, they never were supposed to. But I never was like giving you nothing. I'm giving you something. Now, what I'm actually doing there is trying to access the mythic element of it. Like,
yes.
Really, when I talk about this player, I know he's not really a fucking god of a man. He's just a guy with, like, negligibly better aim than the 7th best player, and he's won this tournament, but you know what? That's only 25,000 more than coming second. And then, like, all the factors in real life would bring me down immediately. But what I'm doing is I'm taking the core elements of him that tap into your mythology of Hercules and fucking Sisyphus and all these other elements, and I'm raising them up to that level so that you experience it like that, and you feel the hype feelings that you would if you were watching fucking Neo in the Matrix Wake Up or whatever, you know. I'm not bringing you down to the world of like, this is a cool guy from Orange State and he really hopes that he can win so his girlfriend is happy. Like, you've killed the hype. You thought you were making hype. You killed it.
Yes. Yeah. It just continues on. Sort of like, it's almost like creating a story of, I mean, for a game that calls its characters heroes, right? You would think that they have this feeling of mythology and trying to spin on the culture and the valuable lessons, but making them more timely in a sense, right? And what's more timely right now than esports, right? In comparison, right? This is a new thing that we all should be excited about. And the problem is that maybe there's still something even within the producers, and I guess if you hire talent from outside that have produced for sports, I wonder if they already can feel the element that it in no way has to be considered a less experience than the normal sports, and because they don't quite feel it yet, they can't also create that type of content, right? It's sort of problematic. For instance, one type of content I'd love to see, and it would solve several issues, I think, is, for instance, one is the complexity of the game. So it's inherently very hard to say someone is good.
Yes.
And then briefly in the matter of a couple of minutes, you have your analysis segment to explain why that happens. Well, one thing I would do is, for instance, get someone like with a voice like that, or get the player himself. I would call that segment Divine Moments. I would take the sickest plays, obviously would record all the first-person cameras, and if someone has a nuts moment, I'll have that player sit down with him, try to, and hopefully he doesn't overstate what he was thinking there, but it would try to find out what is he thinking about, right? What are the elements that he considers? What is the backstory to this play? Maybe how did he go into that game? What's the relevance of this particular matchup, right? Set up that narrative and how it all culminates in that moment where someone just had a like genius moment where everything clicks, right? And made people care that way. I think it would unravel so many issues that we're currently facing with Overwatch as a whole.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Jordan Senkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, and a special thanks to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to get teasers for my upcoming work? Find out who's coming next, what topics are being discussed? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear on one of my shows or in one of my videos? Would you like to ask a question in my monthly Patreon AMA, or perhaps even discuss esports as part of a discussion show I run on a monthly basis? Donators can also discuss the topics expounded upon in my videos with me and the other patrons on our Patreon page. All of this and more at the Patreon link below.